So yeah, I'm Martin Hulse. I run the Tyne and Weir Building Preservation Trust, and hopefully Miranda's somewhere as well.
Hi, yes, I'm Miranda Iossifidis. I'm a sociologist working on the project based at Newcastle University.
Here's a picture I found of the both of us in our COVID attire on site last year. So yeah, I run a building preservation trust. It operates out of Newcastle in the northeast of England. We're a multi-project trust. Here are just a few pictures. You know, we've got merchants' houses, 20th century schools, Georgian churches, industrial heritage. So a whole range of different types of projects. We cover 5 local authorities: Newcastle, Sunderland, Gateshead, both the Tyne sides. And my trust was set up in 1979 to by the local authority as a vehicle to deliver restoration projects. There's a number of similar trusts across the United Kingdom, and I'm fascinated by these delivery vehicles as methods to deliver change and use heritage for the benefit of regeneration. And as Declan described, I'm a board member of the Heritage Trust Network. I'm really there to offer peer-to-peer support across the United Kingdom. And I think in looking at England, that partly due to COVID, the government's finally woken up to the need to protect these vehicles as well as the project. It's not all about project funding now. We're starting to see funding come in to support the vehicles to deliver change. And this, my interest in peer-to-peer support and case studies led me to become involved with Newcastle University. And through that, we joined an open heritage project where Sunderland is one of 6 case studies across Europe, looking at the role of heritage and the communities, looking to test best practice and create active heritage communities. So it's fascinating, Sunderland to go alongside Warsaw, Berlin, Rome, Lisbon. It's been a fascinating project, all funded through Horizon 2020. And behind the labs, there's a series of observatory cases, again looking for best practice and commonality between projects. For those of you who want to know more about these different projects, there is some links we provide to kind of give you access into the information. But back to Sunderland. Sunderland was triggered really with the transfer of 3 buildings to the trust in 2018. We've received funding from a range of grant fundings, and we've undertaken work, phase 1 works to repair the shell and the ground floor. And this momentum that we've created has led to the council being really positive and proactive in helping us look to expand the project. So let's look at it in detail. Here's a quick image of Sunderland, the city by the sea, and just focusing in on our site. Sunderland's an incredible city that's basically moved as it's expanded. It's moved up the hill. It started as a small town next to the fishing port, and on a series of expansions has grown up the hill and joined with Bishop Wearmouth at the top of the hill. And here's the buildings where I first saw them in 2016. These are probably 3 of the most disgusting buildings you've ever seen. It was difficult to kind of even enter them to kind of understand what we had there. We had rats, drugs, water, rubbish, all combined to kind of create an awful experience. But what you had here was 3 early 19th century merchants' houses as the town expanded, converted into commercial very early in their life. And one of them in the middle here was the first Binns department store, which then became part of the House of Fraser Group. So a complete change of the building use, you know, quite early in their life. But these buildings are only grade 2 listed, and I think Paul was talking before about the levels of listing in England. So you've got grade 1, grade 2 star, and grade 2. These are grade 2, and the problem is the heritage was never seen as important enough to save the buildings. The council were keen to save them, but funding wasn't going to come from heritage alone to bring these buildings back to life. So instead, we started to look at with the community as to how they were wanting to use the building. So use became more important than heritage, and bringing these buildings back to life. Quite early in the consultation, we came across a name, Pop Rex, and this was a local band who set up a community pop-up temporary shop to promote their records. It felt like an important piece of the community jigsaw, somewhere where people could meet and do interesting things. And so from that, we kind of created a vision, a dream of a new music venue for Sunderland that would be owned by the community. And this kind of vision that we created brought in the big stakeholders. It brought in the local authority and brought in Historic England. And the council, in their wisdom, bought buildings from a private owner, but then 5 minutes later handed them over to the trust in a back-to-back arrangement. Historic England came in with funding to do emergency repairs, basic remit to stop the buildings killing anyone, because these buildings were starting to fall into the street and also needed quick emergent restoration. Once we'd done the urgent works and just held the shells, it was really then turning back to the use and to culture as the kind of driver for change. And this is Pop Rex, and they brought in a singer here. This is James Bay. So to bring a profile to the buildings and bring that magic that you all need in your projects. And during those emergency works, we realised that we could actually put some meanwhile use in some of the spaces. And so this is what the first gig that we held in the store, completely changing the dynamics of the area, bringing people to the space. This is kind of one of my proudest moments as I went to this event with the generator in the back of the car, not knowing whether the building's electrics would actually be ready in time. And we were having to plan kind of, just wanted to get the band on the stage to play the music. And we also ran events during Heritage Open Days, using different events to bring people into the space and to test different ideas as to what would work and how we could develop the space. And here we are in 2021 with the buildings, the shell of the buildings restored. What happened was the city was back in 2016. The city was trying to bid for the Capital of Culture 2021. So this year they would hope to have been the Capital of Culture, which has gone to Coventry. That failed, but the change in dynamics in government funding meant that high streets became a key theme. Local authorities and government wanted to see the regeneration of high streets. And so I was fortunate to have a project on a high street in advanced stage of restoration. If we did the whole project in one go, it would be about £2.5 million, but we managed to raise about £800,000 to get this first stage done. And this kind of shows you the phases of the work we've gone through to drag these buildings back into life and create this venue space in the middle of the building. And the coffee shop is about ready to open. I think hopefully it's going to open a week on Friday, and the coffee machine is going to be placed, in the centre of the building. Because for me, that coffee machine is the kind of key to this cultural regeneration. The idea is to create a family, gather people around the coffee machine, and people will buy coffee, and then that will kind of promote the long-term viability of the project. Because from day one, Pop Rex were quite keen to remind me that music venues don't make much money, and you've got to look at a variety of funding sources to be able to kind of keep these places alive. And I think returning to the heritage, we started to, it wasn't just about the buildings that we were concerned about, it was the whole area. It was regenerating the heritage, the conservation area. And so we helped the council write a plan for a heritage action zone, which brought more funding from Historic England to regenerate the area. And then our site started to kind of lift as to So the buildings in red there, 170 to 175, those are the buildings that we've been working on. And we're now starting to kind of think, well, you've got to actually regenerate the area to bring more people in to service that coffee machine, to kind of gather an army of creatives around the area. So currently I'm running some project development work through the Architectural Heritage Fund of 177 High Street, which we call the Tyre Shop. And here's the Tyre Shop, kind of it's a good solid building of a similar age that's been plastered with pebble dash and gone through a series of unfortunate changes. But inside is actually a wonderful double height space, and it's a good solid building that can bring about a change to the area. You can just see the building of the pebble dash up at the top of the right of this picture. Just trying to explain how we're kind of expanding our work. And then this work has all then acted as a catalyst for a developer to come in to look at regenerating the area behind the tyre shop. And this is the scheme that's being developed now. We're waiting for some funding through the Levelling Up Fund to see whether this can go ahead. But the white building in the bottom right is the tyre shop. And so we'll deliver that scheme, and then it'll roll out. The developer will then come in with some private finance to develop the back scheme. So that's my kind of whistle through 5 years of very hard work. I'll hand over to Miranda now to look at more cultural activity.
Hi, yeah, so as Martin talked about, I guess one thing that's happening now that the buildings are in a state for people to visit them is a continuation of some of the meanwhile use kind of community building work that was happening a few years ago before lockdown and before the real construction period happened. So it's an interesting period of time now to see how the two actors who have taken over the buildings, that's Poprex, as Martin discussed, and then also Sunshine Cooperative, how they're trying to engage with different communities and how they both of them have a vision of kind of creating opportunities in a very deprived region and city and also part of the city. So both of them have training opportunities within them for young people, and here you can see some of the community events that have happened at Sunshine Corner since September last month. So they've been doing some cooking workshops during Heritage Open Days, and some kind of, they're working with local producers and local permaculture growers to sort of talk about the issues that they really care about, which is to do with sustainable food. And they've kind of gone from being an online business during lockdown to being kind of grounded in place. And I think the one thing that links the different people involved in the project is they're very grounded in the area and the region. So if you think about culture-led regeneration in different cities, I mean, I'm most familiar from my research with such projects in London. They can be very aggressive and very alienating for people who live in the area, whereas in Sunderland it's quite a different sort of context, because the people who are running all of these activities are very invested kind of personally, emotionally, and over a long period of time. So it's a definitely more grounded approach to culture-led regeneration, which is something that I think is really interesting about this project. If you'd like to share the next slide, Martin, that would be great. So here you can see the first event that happened at Poprex in July that was part of Summer Streets Festival, which is again it's a festival run by someone who's involved in various different activities. And that's something that's really interesting about this case study compared to other cities that I've done research in, which is that you have these cultural actors that have their fingers in many pies, which means that there's a sort of flexibility and experimentation that's able. So lots of different things can happen and change, and there's a sort of openness to that because there's a lot of connection between the different actors. And so here you see a sort of spoken word poetry slam happening in Poprex space, and the transformation that this space has seen is even in just a year is quite astounding. So I think another really interesting thing about this project is how despite all the different challenges that lockdown brought, is kind of able to operate. But the question now is around the different kinds of uses on the first floors. And so actually both of the actors have these different spaces that can be hired. So that's another thing that Martin mentioned about how to generate income for these spaces. And both of them have got spaces such as this venue or the community room in Sunshine that they're going to hire out and have different kind of level costing for different kind of actors, and that's another way of bringing different groups into this space. If you'd like to share the next slide, that would be great. Another thing that we're doing as part of the project is mapping local social and cultural infrastructure, because this part of the city has seen quite a lot of change in the past 5 years. So it's interesting to see how kind of over time you have different kind of artists, studios, different music studios, and different social organizations working with different young people and different groups. And so you can see kind of a cluster of interconnected organizations growing in this area. So it's interesting to think about how these spaces as sort of community spaces and places to gather and meet, as Martin said, can become more meaningful. And it's interesting that Martin mentioned this like figure of the coffee, because usually in literature on gentrification, it's this notion of, you know, the sign of the cappuccino being the first marker of gentrification, and is sort of like linked to feelings of resentment and then obviously displacement in terms of rising rent. But in Sunderland, the context is slightly different because of the kind of, you know, kind of quite big unemployment and the general kind of deprivation, in the sense that any sort of gentrification that's happening here is quite grounded and very slow. So even the housing development that Martin mentioned, it's kind of, you know, there are questions around by local actors when I'm doing interviews, there's questions about if that will happen or not. So I think that there's a lot of flux and a lot of, you know, these things are happening over a very long period of time rather than in a sort of aggressive short period. Thanks. I think that might be the final slide. Oh no, of course, this is so basically the buildings have just opened, and for local for Open Heritage Days, we organized an exhibition that was around edible heritage stories. So we commissioned our local artists to work with writers and stories that are connected to people who are involved in the different buildings. And then the exhibition was installed in the shop front of Sunshine so that it could be visible at any time. So this was another thing that we're trying to think about, ways of having people kind of connect with the buildings as they're opening, because this is, you know, they've been out of use for so long. So they had QR codes. So at the moment, there's a lot of kind of experimentation around getting people in whilst they're still in this sort of semi-open state, and kind of getting people familiar with what's going on at these places and kind of wanting to get involved in them. So yeah, thanks a lot. Ready for questions. And yeah, these are images of the other projects in the Open Heritage, the other labs in the Open Heritage project, which is across spanning Europe. So we meet regularly to discuss challenges, ongoing practices, different approaches around adaptive heritage reuse in these really different contexts. So that's been a really valuable experience in terms of thinking about European policy around adaptive heritage reuse, because you have very different social, economic, cultural, political contexts and very different approaches to adaptive heritage reuse. So as part of this project, Sunderland is a lab that kind of provides some ideas for going forwards at a European level.
I think just in summary, the surprise has been the change in focus of the high street and the dominance now in projects in England, to the detriment of other projects, really, that people are wanting to regenerate the high street and bring new activity, especially cultural activity, to the high street to kind of help in the survival of these zones. And that's just, the project's just been at the right time, at the right place, and has been able to kind of benefit from a series of of funding streams. But it's really based around the vision of an active cultural space that's brought the funders to the table.
I see Tom's question, Tom Blake, how do you generate engagement from the public? And one major way is through the particular actors that are involved in the project. Pop, Rap and Sunshine both have their own communities around music and around sustainable and organic food. And so it's from our perspective, it's kind of about helping them facilitate that.
Thank you, Miranda and Martin.